just for a second or a few minutes, whatever, and talk about a Southern tradition gone terribly wrong. Um, One of the common condiments in the South, as in things you put on your food to make them taste different, is pepper sauce. That is some pepper sauce I made this morning. These are going to be gifts to some folks at Christmas. I grew those peppers, all of the peppers, I grew those, and they're in vinegar. Pepper vinegar. My granddaddy always had it on the table, and he put it on collard greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, black eyed peas, and rice. Um, so I cut the stems off of those this morning and put them in hot vinegar that I'd heated up a good bit. Then I went to Walmart, and then I was finishing up my shopping, and I did this. Just scraped out the corner of my eye, as lots of people do. Oh, yeah, it's a natural human thing. And I didn't wash my hands. I had flashbacks to getting pepper sprayed in the Air Force, which was just something we had to do as part of certification as a military cop. Yeah, be careful. It's one of those stupid things that we do that we don't think about until it happens. And that translates into so much more life, doesn't it? There are a million little things that we do that we don't think about until it's too late. And we try to teach our kids, to do the right thing or do the intelligent thing or know certain things about life. Some stuff you it's like touching a hot stove. You just don't know until it happens. Most of my videos lately have been guitar centric. So as a little bit of something different, thought I'd show off something in my house that I think is pretty cool. So look up here. That's a piece of folk art. I would guess it was made a century ago because it's from my mother's family's farm up in North Carolina. It was in the hallway my whole life. I say the hall, it's kind of an open air hall. Had a screen door out onto the sleeping porch, side porch. But that was out there, if I remember right. It might have been in the kitchen, but I'm pretty sure it was in the hall. And it's a piece of folk art, presumably done by somebody in my family. My great grandparents married, I want to say over a century ago, and so my great grandmother's family gave them that piece of land to have a farm and a little house they lived in and raised 11 kids in. This was there, and they were tobacco farmers. Now I have a theory. If I scroll down, that's a photograph of a tobacco plant, beautiful tobacco plant that my wife had framed for me. That's a plant in bloom. Typically, farmers would break the flowers off of every plant, except maybe one, maybe two, three. Because from one tobacco plant, if you look at that photograph, each one of those flowers is a seed pod, and each seed pod holds hundreds of seeds. So one plant can give you a whole next year's tobacco seed. It's very time and labor intensive to grow tobacco, and it has to be grown from seed every year. And you want to make sure that the seed that you have is as pure as possible. You don't want plants cross-pollinating and mutating and changing. So tobacco seed is very heavily protected, like other seed, to keep the strain pure. But a tobacco plant can be anywhere from 3 feet to 7 feet tall, depending on the species, or not the species, but the varietal. And so I think that is a depiction of that. of a tobacco plant. I can't prove it, and I don't, I don't know. There's, as far as I know, there's no one left alive that knows what this was and who made it and when and why. But it's just paint on a glass pane, and I think it might be a tobacco plant. I think that's pretty cool. This right here is an old Lucky Strike ad from, I'm guessing the 50s, based on the fashion. I'd guess it's the 50s. I'm not positive of that, but I bought that up in Boone, North Carolina. There's an antique shop on Main Street in Boone that we used to go to when I was a kid. I bought this on my honeymoon because that store's still there. And then we framed it because it's both a thing from our honeymoon and it's a cool piece of advertising art history. Of course, we all know nowadays that tobacco companies were pretty nefarious in covering up the fact that tobacco is damaging to your health. So I'm not advocating use of tobacco in this ad or in this video, but this is my family's history. They were tobacco farmers going way back. Now, I don't know what they did exactly 200-300 years ago, especially 300 years ago when they got to North Carolina, but I suspect they began planting tobacco immediately, because when my family came to North America from Britain, tobacco was cash, straight up money. And our family farm is only, by modern travel standards, an hour or two from Jamestown, Virginia, in eastern North Carolina. And so I suspect our family have been growing tobacco for over 300 years. Actually, it's 350 years. So anyway, I thought that's a cool piece of folk art that is part of my family's history, and something that I suspect is distinctly tied to tobacco. And a little bit more reinforcement of that, if you want to understand more deeply how important tobacco was, not only to my family, but to Eastern North Carolinians, early Eastern colonials in America, in the common living room, for lack of a better phrase, the den, whatever you want to call it, the common room in our family farmhouse. You might say the kitchen was the real common room, but the room that had couches and magazines and a television had a framed tobacco leaf on the wall. It was a cured tobacco leaf, that beautiful golden color that's depicted right here. Looked just like that, except it was a real one, and it was probably dampened so it could be stretched out, which is how tobacco was looked at, like in this picture anyway. Then it was framed. I don't know if it was my Uncle John that did it. I don't know if it was Mom and Daddy. I don't know who framed that tobacco leaf, but it was so important to them that they framed it and put it on the wall as a perfect example of their work as farmers. Somebody did, anyway. So yeah, I'm not here to talk about heritage and all that stuff that people like to talk about nowadays as justification for bad ideas, such as tobacco use. But it's just a part of who my family are. It's part of our history. And it's worth cherishing if you have that stuff. You don't have to cherish things that aren't worth cherishing, but you definitely should cherish things that are worthy. Things like virtues, things like totems or items that meant something to people in my family or in your family. They're worth cherishing. They're worth reminding. It doesn't give you any glory to come from people who worked hard or have been somewhere a long time. It doesn't give you don't glean glory from that. what you do glean is a knowledge that you came from somewhere, and if it weren't for those people, you wouldn't be here. In some ways, those are painful memories for some people. A lot of people come from pasts that have uh, unfortunate, terrible, uh, criminal history, um, and that can be painful. But uh, if there are things worth remembering, things that are good, they should be remembered just as often as the things that were bad. If for no other reason than to remind you that you came from somewhere, that people did things in the past that resulted in your present. Um, we shouldn't whitewash the past. We shouldn't pretend that bad things weren't done by otherwise good people. Um, but there are a lot of reasons to remember the past. Some are bad, some are good. This particular video is focusing on one of the good, which is that piece of folk art behind me that, along with the other pictures below it, reminds me that my family's been here a long time. And what we've created in this country is not great glory and not great achievement in a financial or business sense, but we have created family. We've created people who value people, people who, being a Christian, people who love the Lord, people who, um, for all their faults, love their family and would do anything for them. And hopefully, if nothing else, I know for one thing, my grandparents' funerals, respectively, which my grandmother passed in February 2020, just before COVID was really impacting the United States in a understood way. She had been in bed for a long time with dementia and failing health, so it was not unexpected when she passed. But a year later, a little bit more than a year and a few months later, when my grandfather passed, it was a little more unexpected because he was in such fine health for his age. He would have been 90 this year. He passed away last year before his 89th birthday. But he was in poor health. But at their funerals, which is the main point I'm trying to wrap back around to, what so many friends of theirs talked about were how much they loved my grandparents for their sense of community and their sense of service and their sense of family. They always had themselves and my mom and their other kids involved, whether it was involved with friends who needed help or church, and they were always working. Now, I'm not saying we always have to be working per se. My grandparents took as many vacations as possible, but they worked for other people. They worked for their children, they worked for their families, they worked for their friends. That sort of legacy, to me, is far more valuable than anything monetary that we could have been handed down from them. My grandfather was almost a lifelong civil servant. He joined the Air Force, I believe in 1952, to prevent his brother John from being drafted. My granddad was the youngest of 11 children. He was a twin whose twin had passed away, and also my great-grandmother's first children were twins who passed away. She had two sets of twins in her life, I believe something like 20 years apart almost, And my granddaddy was one of those, and he's the youngest. He was the baby in the family. And his brother John, very close to him in age, was the next youngest. And John was a farmer, very gentle man, not a gentleman, but a gentle man, and never lived anywhere but the farm where that piece of art was his entire life. He was born in that house. He died in the hospital, but he never lived anywhere else. And my granddaddy said once that he knew John didn't want to leave the farm, so he volunteered. And of course, this was in the time of hyper nationalism, the Cold War, right after World War II. My granddaddy was too young to have served in World War II. He was 9 when the United States entered World War II, so he's very young. His brother Edward served in World War II. So my granddaddy volunteered, joined the Air Force, which was a new service, relatively. He was only 4 years old. And he ended up in Savannah, Georgia, where he met my grandmother. And they got married after he made sergeant. And then he was in the Air Force / the Civil Service for the state of Georgia as a National Guardsman for 36 years, something like 36 years. And then after that, he he started working as a security guard for a gated community for like another 20 something years. I mean, the man worked his entire life, and never in a way that made him prosperous like private business would. He tried private business a couple of times at points, and one of the coolest things I've ever seen is a letter that he drafted. Whether, I guess maybe he had to make multiple copies and more than one, or one was sent, asking various firms and businesses for a job, a cover letter essentially. And it was hand typed on a typewriter. And my granddad loved to type. Well, yeah, he loved to type. I mean, he, even up when personal computers were common, he loved to type on a typewriter. And he didn't write, he wasn't a writer. He loved to type. He was very proud of his words per minute, something like 80 words per minute on a typewriter, which is pretty fast. But he never went into private business as a businessman or merchant or anything. And he worked very hard, though. He served his country, he served his community, he served his church, and he served his family. And for all the faults he might have had, like just a terrible temper, which I've sometimes inherited, the legacy he left us was one of love for your country and family, first and foremost for the Lord, and to work for the people that you love and the things that you love. It may not make you rich. I live in a beautiful house. It's 100-year-old house, but we don't live in a fashionable town or city like I grew up in. We live in a very small town where we could afford a house like this. And my wife and I work really hard. Well, I say work really hard. We have worked hard to get where we are, which is not that high on the socioeconomic ladder, but we are extraordinarily blessed. I don't subscribe to the bootstrap theory of history. I don't think everybody in every circumstance by any means can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. There are many different factors that affect where we end up in life. And some of them are outside of our control. Some of them are systemic. Some of them are bigger than any one person or community or even country. Some of them are historical and continue to have a bearing to this day. But I feel so blessed, just beyond measure, to have something like that piece of art behind me to see how from a small tobacco farm in North Carolina, um, such an amazing family could grow. And even though we've all had our ups and downs, our trials, our mistakes, uh, terrible problems at times, I, I, I'm so blessed. There's just no other way to put it. Um, you know, we're not wealthy per se. We are happily middle class. There's no denying that. And by any measure across much of the globe, we are extremely wealthy. But at the same time, we live somewhat modestly, um, and I think that doesn't come from how much money you have. Hopefully, it comes from what you're taught. Uh, I'm not going to pretend that we don't enjoy the things we have. I mean, I have more than one electric guitar. I have lots of pastimes, hobbies, things I like to do, and am able to afford those things. Usually, not always. I was telling my wife the old joke about what do you call uh, someone who puts $10,000 worth of stuff into a $1,000 van and drives 2 hours to make $300 as a musician. Because I'm a musician. I'm not a gigging or working musician, but it's not a cheap hobby. We, my wife is an artist. Art supplies cost money. She works extremely hard to be able to support her love of creating art. And she's not just someone who likes art. She's a formally trained artist. She went to Savannah College of Art and Design and has a degree in illustration. But even so, one thing we have learned as well over time is that creating art, whether it's me making music or her making visual art, fine art, is that um, creating art can be commercial if you want it to be. If you want to work and support yourself as an artist of any kind, that's a wonderfully viable career. But also that if you choose not to make it a career, but you still choose to create, that is just as viable. Things in life don't have to make you money to be worth doing. Um, like I say, we're comfortably middle class. We make plenty of money to support our small family and enjoy many of the things we like doing. But I don't grow a garden because it's going to make me some money. We put in a garden here at this house 2 years ago when the pandemic was raging across this country. But ever since we first couple of 2 years, 3 years into marriage, we've had a garden. And for anybody outside of this country, garden in America means a plot where you grow food crops, or maybe maybe flowers too. But especially for Southern Americans, a garden is where you grow food. Kitchen garden might be what you'd call it elsewhere. Um, and we put that in a couple of years ago at this house. And I'll tell you what, the first garden I put in, which was in 2009 at a farm we lived on, I had the benefit of spraying out the ground. Well, I did that here too, but spraying out the ground to kill all the vegetation, and then hitting it with a disc harrow, which is on the back of a tractor. Some people call it a plow, but a disc harrow just breaks up ground. It slices into it and turns it some. But then after that, you've got to go back with a tiller, and I had a tractor tiller and tilled that plot up, and it was an amazing garden, turning raw ground into arable land. In the modern age, it's very easy when you have a tractor. But at this house out in the yard, I didn't have that. Um, and I kind of adopted it as a labor of love to do it by hand. So I sprayed out the ground to kill all the vegetation, and then I just started digging with a shovel, um, and turning the dirt by hand. Boy, howdy, that will give you appreciation for how people used to have to farm. I did a tiny little plot by hand, no plow. Of course, even going back 10,000 years, they had plows, but whether they were stone or then later metal. Um, turning it by hand, thank goodness I had a steel shovel and a strong back. It was a lot of work. I found a lot of stuff underground, mainly rocks, but also glass, lots of glass, bits and pieces and odds and ends of things that have just been buried. You dig anywhere human settlement is to be found, you dig 6 to 12 inches into the ground, you're going to find some stuff. We have a little glass and bottle collection. My daughter loves to go through the garden and just find glass and collect it. Um, Pieces of pottery that I suspect are just pots, like modern pots. But I'm also kind of tempted to. The area we live in was actually a big pottery center at one point in its history. There's a little tiny museum over in a nearby town dedicated to the pottery industry that was here. Um, but put that garden in. I don't remember why I started talking about this. Uh, Doing that by hand will give you an appreciation for the work that people in the past had to do. And we don't grow that garden to make money. We grow that garden to add a little extra to our table that is fresh, that we've put in. And we've been growing stuff for a long time. So it's not like this is something new. It wasn't part of the trend that kind of kicked off in 2020. But we kind of grow a few things every year, just like everybody does, like tomatoes. But we do summer squash. We did cantaloupes this year, but we only got maybe one or two. We got some blueberry bushes out there, but I like for land I live on to produce something. It doesn't have to produce a lot, but I like it to make something, and I like to make things. So, we've got ornamental plants that we put in, like we've never had roses, but I managed to find a couple of orange rose bushes and put those in for my wife, and we've got various annuals. I definitely prefer, I'm sorry, not annuals, perennials. Prefer perennials because what is the point of a plant that only gives color once and dies? I mean, I know they're beautiful, but if I'm going to put something in my yard, it's going to be so that it's there forever, if possible. So we've got azaleas that I put in, and we've got sage, but a little hedgerow on each side of the front walk of sage, rosemary. And we do have some sage growing, some herbs and things, and none of that's going to make us any money. That's not why we do it. We could spend every moment of our lives trying to make more money, and that could be fine. Yeah, it's not us though. It's not why we feel like we're on this earth. We're not. I remember there's a scene in Cold Mountain where the main character says, "Is that all life is to you? Just working and getting and working and getting?" And sometimes it feels like that. When you've got something that you'd really like to get, like for me, a new guitar, a new anything, whatever it is. If it's not necessary to life, then it's a luxury that I'm working towards as a goal, and that's fine too. And sometimes life does feel like just working and getting and working and getting. But one of the great blessings of my life that I've learned from my family, and one of the great blessings that my wife also feels this way, is that life's not always about working and getting. Very often it's about the opposite. It's about appreciating what you have. And again, I'm just blessed beyond measure. So I started this video to tell you, don't touch your eyes after you've used peppers, or touched peppers, cut them up, been messing around with them. But I'm ending this video to tell you, maybe try growing some peppers. You might not make any money off of it. I'm not growing peppers to compete with that fella that grows Carolina Reapers in South Carolina. I'm just growing them because I feel compelled. There's a kind of a joke. Well, it's not a joke. It's kind of real. It's especially real since it's hanging over our front door. My mother-in-law, knowing that my wife and I are big J.R.R. Tolkien fans, we love Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, Children of Hurin, all Tolkien. We love it. She made a little sign out of a piece of reclaimed wood. She painted it a beautiful blue that matched our house, and then in gold lettering she wrote on it with gold paint. I don't remember it off the top of my head exactly, but it's in this house live 2 hobbits and an elf, referring to my wife and me as hobbits and our daughter Evie as an elf, because our daughter's small, blonde, skinny, elvish looking at the moment, at least. And that's really what it comes down to, is we grow things because we feel compelled. We create art because we feel compelled. To me, it's a universal human instinct based on the fact that, at least to me as a Christian, we were created, and so we feel the need to create. Whether you agree with that's why we do it or not, it's fine. We don't have to agree on why people feel compelled to make and create and grow things, but that's why we do it. So watch out for the things you grow, though, because they might end up with your eye slamming itself shut and burning like crazy. Anyway, I think that'll do it for today. I've been rambling on for quite a while. So hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you next time.